Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside Today's Boardrooms. I'm Eric Shore from Diligent Institute, and I'll be your host of today's discussion. We are going to explore how boards and management teams oversee the topic of climate change. And for this discussion, I'm thrilled to welcome Susan Angele, a senior advisor in KPMG's Board Leadership Center and the author of the recent report entitled Boardroom Climate Competence. Susan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And Susan, I think that the interesting thing about your recent report is that it hit on some of the less usual suspects when it comes to climate. So a lot of the time we're talking about climate and talking about risk hand in hand. But what you found is boards are also talking about it as a chance for value creation. And wanted to see if you could share with our audience the kinds of opportunities that you're seeing boards consider now from a strategy perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So the paper is based on research that we did where we spoke to numerous board directors and sustainability leaders. And what we found is that the biggest challenge, but of course the biggest opportunity, is as it relates to value creation. And it comes in a couple of different areas. The first is what should be low-hanging fruit, and that's about efficiencies. So as companies are thinking about their energy usage, converting to renewable energy, just reducing overall the amount of energy uses, they are finding significant savings that they can then invest in other aspects of growth. We're also seeing quite a lot of recycled material used to create new products. The fashion industry is one example of an industry that really seems to be doing a lot of that. Then on this issue of products, we're just seeing a lot of innovation going on in new products and services that are made with climate issues in mind. So we all know about the huge amount of competition and innovation in the electric vehicle market. What we're seeing, as well as this being applied to cars, is it's being applied to trucks, industrial trucks, to farm equipment, and the concept, even scooters. So that's one thing. Another is in agricultural products. Just my favorite example is the apple. So the fruit, not the computer. There's an apple that's been developed that's specifically developed to survive and thrive in a climate changed world. So whichever companies are able to really use those apples in their production are clearly going to have a huge competitive advantage. And there's all kinds of examples, but we're seeing just a lot of innovation as companies think through the value creation opportunities. And a big enabler of it, of course, is the funding that's available, the Inflation Reduction Act at the federal level, also state funding, as well as public-private partnerships. So a lot, we could spend an hour on that, but I'm going to stop there.
That's great. And another area that you covered in the report relates to talent. And I know companies are thinking about this in a lot of ways, incorporating climate and sustainability into their overall approach. From a talent perspective, what kinds of things are you seeing companies, and in particular boards, talk about at the intersection of talent and climate?
Yeah, sure. So one thing is to have someone in management who is at a C-suite level who understands the issues, because a lot of times you got, sort of your chief sustainability officer, and the person is on the side. People go to the chief sustainability officer where there's a climate related issue that someone spots. What you really want is someone in the room where the issue potentially has nothing to do with climate, but the person can say, look, there is a climate spot issue here. We need to talk about this. And so that gets to, do you have someone in your C-suite that has that capability, or alternatively, do you want to bring in a chief sustainability officer who really has that business acumen and broad strategic background that can play in that space? So that's one area. Then the other area is just broadly in the organization. I was fascinated by a LinkedIn survey where they did a report analyzing postings, and they were looking at where are green skills being used. And the job postings were surprisingly, as you would expect in sustainability areas, but also in other areas. So things like data and analytics, fleet managers, even healthcare. All of those were considered green jobs. And that's because it is just so many issues, whether it's adapting to the changing climate and extreme weather, or understanding how consumers and customers are thinking differently about it. It really permeates through the organization. So it is a full business talent issue, and boards are asking questions about that as well.
And not only that, one of your recommendations in the report is related to maintaining a climate competent board. Help us understand, what you mean by that.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So let me start by saying what I don't mean by it. I don't mean that every board needs a climate scientist. What I do mean is that every board needs to have the ability to ask questions, to know what questions to ask, and be able to assess the answers. Whether it's an energy company where this is front and center of everything they do, or a company where it might not be considered quite as material, but still could be important to the company. So climate competence in one aspect may mean having a climate scientist on board, but it also could mean board education. It also could mean bringing in an advisory committee, bringing in an expert, and it's really up to each board to say, what are the issues? How do we need to make sure that we're on top of them as a board? And what does that mean in terms of board composition and education?
And notwithstanding our conversation about climate and strategy, it is still a major risk management issue for boards. And wanted to get your take on how boards are seeing that, and what kinds of risks are rising to the top of the climate-related risk agenda for the boards that you're working with and that you talked to in this study.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, there's the physical risk, and that can take two different aspects. The sort of extreme weather, changing weather patterns, more storms, fires, floods, what have you. Seeing it in sort of two time frames. One is the short term, where companies now are looking to do crisis management in ways that they haven't had to do it before. So rather than it's, what happens if one plant goes down in a storm, it's what if there's a fire in one plant, a storm in another, and something else in a third. And because of the now strength and breadth of these potential issues, boards are participating in tabletop exercises to say, okay, let me see if management really is on top of it. So that's number one. And then there's the sort of the longer term risk of changing weather patterns. And we're seeing it, just as one out of many examples. Clothing companies are saying, what about cotton? There are threats to its growing patterns. And so how do we manage that in the long term? So those are a couple of examples. Transition risk is another whole long area where that gets into reputational risk and really making sure that the company is moving forward in the energy transition economy.
And the point that you make about the interconnection of all these risks is a really important one. So each on their own bring certain challenges, but they're all happening at the same time in many instances. And so that's part of the reason why this topic has become so important for boards. Susan, one final lightning round question for you. Companies have enhanced their voluntary disclosures. There's lots of compliance mandated disclosures floating around over both the United States and abroad. How are boards thinking about communication broadly in this environment where there's a lot of different options that they can take?
Yeah. So first, just, kind of broadly on the regulatory disclosures, we are seeing sort of a discussion about, does it belong in the audit committee or where does it belong somewhere else? It certainly belongs somewhere where those regulatory filings are going to be provided with oversight at the board level. But then more broadly, as you say, it's a question of, if you think about everything from marketing materials and, statements to employees, all the way to regulatory filings, are the communications clear? Is it very clear what the company's point of view is? Are they consistent across those different types of communications? And then are they accurate? And how do we know that they're accurate? And that's really where the board is starting to focus, to say, not only is it a matter of, are you ready for the SEC's filing when it's finalized, but it's also a matter of, let's look at that breadth of communication across the spectrum.
Yeah, and accuracy, obviously an important point. In your report, you quote a director who says there's one rule: don't lie, which I think is good advice for everyone, at least as a minimum threshold. Susan, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us and digging deeper on some of these issues. I'd recommend to everyone to take a look at the KPMG Board Leadership Center's new report, Boardroom Climate Competence, Advancing the Board Management Conversation. And with that, thank you. And we will be back with another episode next week.